This is a meeting of the Devens Jurisdiction Framework Committee. My name is Victor Norman. I will chair the meeting. I'll now call the roll. Alan Minoyan.
Here.
Janice Livingston.
Here.
Robert Pontbriand.
Here.
Rich Maori.
Here.
Kim Bragan. Brian Sawyer.
Here.
Logan Breeze.
Here.
Mike McGovern.
Here.
Bill Marshall.
Here.
Neil Angus.
Present.
John Cater. Melissa Rivera. Odile Smith. Christian Cullen. We have a majority. We are in order. First item on our agenda are meeting minutes from March 13th, 2024. Any comments? Corrections?
Just a couple of minor edits, Mr. Chair. On page two. Yes, page 2, under new business, just lifting the housing cap, not the cape. And on page 3, under public remarks, the last bullet says Mr. Green wanted to know how much land is considered undevelopable. I believe that was you, Mr. Chair, Victor, that wanted to know how much land was undeveloped residential. So I think we should just add that was Victor Norman that made the comment, and how much undeveloped residential land is considered developable was the question. And I had advised that 80 acres was considered buildable.
Archers.
But it's acres, not archers. But I had said that it was available, not considered buildable. I said, you know, there was a whole discussion about slopes and wetlands, and so I just want to make sure that that was 80 acres available with some slope and or development restrictions, we could just say.
Okay.
With what?
With some development restrictions.
Okay, so 80 acres with developmental.
Are you Christian Cullen?
I am.
Well, it's been a while. Welcome.
It has, thank you.
Restrictions.
Okay, any other comments? Is there a motion to approve the minutes as corrected?
So moved.
Rich?
Second.
Robert Pontbriand. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Without objection, the minutes are approved unanimously.
Mr. Chair,
Bill Marshall.
we have no picture of the large group.
Oh, just see the start video.
Oh,
Yeah.
my apologies.
There you go.
So that brings the segue that I needed. So I'm handling the Zoom, and so please be patient with me, and I'm going to try to share the screen shortly. So just have a little patience, and if you raise your hand, just give me a moment to see you. Okay? So thank you. Okay.
Okay. Okay, stakeholder updates, Town of Air.
At this time, we have none. Our local committee hasn't met for a while, and we're working on getting that back up and running.
Okay. Town of Harvard, we changed our meeting date, so we have not yet met in April. We will do that in a week or so. Town of Shirley?
Yes, just quickly, part of our discussion last time we met, I did reach out to Senator Cronin and Senator Eldridge. I reached out to an official at Mass Development to work on a meeting with the three town administrators and key stakeholders, if you will. Both Senator Cronin and Senator Eldridge are going to try and get someone from the Secretary's office to attend the meeting. So my guess is it's going to be a couple more weeks, but as soon as I have more information, I'll let the group know.
Which secretary are you referring to? Housing or Economic Development?
Economic Development.
Okay. It might be probably impossible to arrange, but since the legislation mentions the Secretary of Housing and Livable Communities, it would be, and I suspect they're probably the prime mover behind the legislation. Anyway, it might be good to.
Yeah, I'll connect with them and ask if they want to include, and they may already do that, reach out to housing as well, so.
Devens, both Melissa and John notified me that they're unable to make it. John said he may be here late. Devens Enterprise Commission, Neil or Bill?
We have nothing, Mr. Chair.
REFI, I think that what we decided at the last meeting was just to hold that in suspense until we know what the Commonwealth's motivations are. So Janice?
Well, I mean, that's not a bad idea, but at the same time, regardless of what the state's motivations are, we would still have to, the assumption is right now in 2033, a decision is being made for either status quo, give back, become its own town. We know it's still, that part hasn't changed, right?
Well, that's precisely the point. We're not sure it hasn't changed. I think what came up at our last meeting, the point that Mike raised is this amending Chapter 498, the beginning of something that will abrogate the provisions for a decision by 2033.
Okay, well, all right. But by the same token, are we not just asking for information? Isn't that what this is? A request for information? And wouldn't it still behoove us to go ahead and post it? And because we could always change it as we see fit, but aren't we potentially losing ground by not posting the RFEI to get information?
Help me out here, Mike.
I don't think it really matters, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Not putting it out for, even if we don't put it out for 3 or 4 months, I think everything's in such a state of flux. I think maybe talk to the delegation and possibly somebody from either Mass Development or one of the Secretary's office and figure out really what's the plan here. The other concern a little bit too is going back to if Mass Development's not at this table, I really struggle with this, and not that it's my decision, I get that, on what this is, right? What this RFEI is, because so if you think of it this way, we want somebody to come and tell us, a company to come and tell us, okay, well, this is what you need to look at and it's going to cost you X amount, right? We've basically already outlined what we want somebody to look at, and I'm not sure if we're going to get companies that come back and say, well, I'm going to have to do all this work to figure out what it would to basically create a town, or whatever other scenarios may arise. And I don't know if they're going to be looking for money. They're going to be looking to get paid for that.
Well, of course, they would be looking to get paid for that, but isn't that the purpose of sending this out, to also have people come back and say, well, this is based on what you've put in here, this is what we think you're asking us to look at, and we estimate it would cost umpty some amount. And at that point, we either have more information and we're like, yay, you're the one that's got the best price, and we all agree because you're going to give us the information that we're looking for, and we go forward, or we have the information, we're still waiting to hear what the state is doing, and we've just pressed pause on it.
So,
right? I mean, that's the way it works in like the federal government and stuff like that. So
well, yeah, and look at it. We can send it out. It's not going to hurt to see what we get back. If we get back nothing, then we realize that something needs to change. I guess I'm just still struggling with that. This should just flat out be an RFP, right? Because what you just explained in terms of getting information back and a price and everything, that's really typically an RFP.
Which actually is what I wanted years ago when we first started talking about this. I thought it was better for us to do an RFP rather than even an RFQ or an RFEI, whatever. We've gone through many name iterations over the years. But we've gone from, since the beginning of this committee, like this is, we need to hurry up and get this out, get this together. We finally get something that we can get posted, and now we're gonna sit, and I don't know if it helps us. It doesn't hurt us to send it out. I don't know if it necessarily helps us in waiting.
I think a lot of,
Because I know that, you know, some have said at last month's meeting, which I was not here, but I read the meeting minutes, that they're like, well, it's obvious the state's in control. So I'm just gonna ask the one question. Who here ever thought the state wasn't in control? Okay, so that hasn't changed.
so I think what, the decision basically just holding tight with that, I think really was a reaction to what I threw out at the very beginning of the meeting of what are we doing here? And so I think that was kind of a result of the discussion that we had here. Now, obviously, we're a month later. I think some of the stuff that I said may have sunk in, and we've had a month to absorb it, right? I don't know. At the end of the meeting, or, well, now, we can have another discussion, I guess, if you want, if you want to send it out. But I don't think it matters personally, I don't think it matters one way or another whether we just table it for the next month. I think the biggest thing is probably a little bit later here, having the real discussion of what are we doing at this table, you know? And it's kind of putting the cart before the horse, saying, all right, let's do the RFEI, and then all of a sudden, you know, throughout this meeting here, we have a discussion that comes to a decision that, you know, we halt meeting or temporarily suspend meeting or whatever we end up doing, or we continue to meet, right? I don't know.
Mr. Chair, could I just be Mr. Chair? I'll just say the, you know, request for expressions of interest. Yeah, obviously we're not seeking proposals, but often starting with that process helps the group or whatever initiative you're doing. In other words, when we get those expression of interest back, it actually informs and helps us, Mike, would you say, further better understand what are we doing here. Expressions of interest, right, you know, you can either get them or just say that was nice, or you can really do something with them. Okay, folks, so I think putting out the expression of interest, first, you're just going to see who's out there in the game, even interested in looking at, you know, how you redevelop, or where the military installations now decommissioned are going. You see who's out there, and frankly, what they submit can help be insightful, inform us of what we're discussing, because it's sort of an external, experts coming, sort of just putting what their backgrounds, what their experience, maybe some other comparable things they've done. And I think it could be beneficial prior to doing a, you know, request for proposals or anything. I'm just saying you can make the most of it, if you will, by getting those in.
Like I said,
there's an
I mean,
opportunity to do something with it.
It doesn't matter to
And you can engage
me.
in conversations with those firms.
I think it was a result of that bomb I dropped at the beginning of the meeting last month.
That's right on.
And that's
saw it.
where we
Yeah.
just said, you know,
Yeah.
so.
Okay, what do we want to do?
Wouldn't we have
Rich?
ideally dollars secured before we put out an REFI, even if it's for information? Obviously, we need dollars secured for an RFP, but I would think these firms would want to know, hey, what kind of budget are we looking at, so we can give you a sense of scale.
Well, see, this is part of the problem that I'm struggling with here, that, you know, we'll send it out and, you know, a company is going to say, well, I'm not going to do all this work and there's nothing in it for me.
But they will if they're
They will.
prospecting, guys. They're private
Yeah.
business. They have to prospect for new clients and businesses, and that's all this is to them. It's an event they have to make.
Maybe,
To
yeah.
prospect for new clients, and, you know,
So,
that's all it is to them.
Quick question, though. I mean, your comment about, you know, money. Well, why didn't we talk about that before when we talked about, a couple of months ago, about, you know, getting this RFEI written and posted? So if we weren't worried about posting an RFEI a few months ago, and us not necessarily having money, you know, why is today changed for an RFEI?
For an RFEI, it's a question I've been asking for months. It's like, and part of this is educating me on an RFEI. I usually just deal in RFPs.
Right, exactly.
So I'm just trying to understand the difference to a firm. To your
Yeah.
point, it doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of difference. To your question of, it's clear the state's in charge. We've been sitting here planning all sorts of things, and the state came and knocked everything off the
It
table.
did, it did.
Kind of said, we're going to do what we want.
It did.
So it has changed. So in that scenario, I'm just trying to figure out, what are we doing with the RFI? I'm sure it's fine if we put it out, to your point, Alan.
He was out there.
We could learn something or two. I
Both
don't-
parties are
It's a
prospect.
puzzle piece that I'm not sure where it fits, because we honestly don't know what the puzzle is.
Yeah, and it could, it could be a case we get a couple of companies respond to us and nobody, right? So I mean, like I said, I'm not opposed to it, right? The tabling of it was as a result of the discussion last meeting.
Robert?
Mr. Chair, and having worked with my colleague from Shirley on the RFEI before he dropped the atomic bomb at the last meeting, which it is ready to go, and having worked with him on it, I would propose that there's no harm, we issue it. One of the things that may happen, as you saw in the RFEI, there's an opportunity for potential respondents to ask, other questions. We may get that initial question, which I think we will from some firms, about funding source or so forth. We'll cross that bridge then. I think if we issue it, also, it may also, as our ongoing sort of strategy, press strategy and so forth, maybe generate some further interest. So, I mean, I think I just want to manage, and I think you're trying to do too, Mike, is just manage expectations. I think we should issue it, and let's see if there's any responses. It's not going to cost anything, and we're not going to lose anything, and then we reconvene. What do we say? We put it out for, what, a month?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chair, if there is an objection, I would make a motion to authorize that the RFEI be officially posted and released for a 30-day period.
Seconded.
Okay. All right, any further discussion? Okay. On the motion, I'll call the roll. Alan Minoyan?
Yes.
Janice Livingston?
Yes.
Robert Pontbriand?
Yes.
Rich Maori?
Yes.
Brian Sawyer?
Yes.
Logan Breeze?
Yes.
Mike McGovern?
Yes.
Bill Marshall?
Yes,
Neil Angus?
Yes.
Kristen Cullen?
Yes.
Okay. The motion carries, so we're on the road.
Mr. McGovern and I will handle the mechanics of it and update the chair to update the committee.
Okay, when it actually does get posted, make sure the committee's informed.
Yes.
of the exact date.
Mr. Chair, if it's okay with you, I'm going to share screen and I'm going to post the packet so that people can see it while we talk about.
Mr. Chair, just a quick question on the RFEI.
Neil?
Can you remind me who responses are going to? You? Mr.
No,
Chair?
I think one of the towns.
I think they were
It's
coming
going
me.
to town of Shirley.
Going to Shirley? Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And those will be circulated to everybody
Yeah.
for the committee to form a response?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. That one's not, we're not talking about this one yet. So don't look at the screen just yet.
Okay.
But, quick question, can everybody on Zoom see the screen, my shared screen?
yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this is the next item. It's not, well,
It's the penultimate item.
right.
The ultimate item right now is the legislation to amend Chapter 498. Mike spoke briefly about it. Rich, you might want to take it up from here. I sent the letter to all the members of the committee that the town of Harvard sent to the governor and Secretary Howe.
Okay, let me go to that one. I thought that was later on, so. I put it in the wrong place in the packet. Keep talking. Okay, there's the letter to the schools. You want the letter to the governor? Okay,
That would be it.
there's the letter to the governor. Okay.
Okay, Rich?
Yeah, this was developed by the Devens, our town, Devens Jurisdiction Committee, and signed by me as the chair. Simply giving a quick background, current status, and then asking, or suggesting that we try to figure out jurisdiction before we try to figure out who lives where, simply so we can, those folks who do move into Devens, once we, with the housing cap unleashed, if you will, where they're going to live, where they're going to go to school. We're simply raising some questions that simply unilaterally moving the caps on business and housing sparks some questions. We're saying we need to get those addressed, and one way to address it would be through figuring out jurisdiction. Are they going to go for it? Probably not. But at least we're trying to say, hey, you've created a whole host of questions that we need to get figured out. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's a lot of information contained in the letter. And I think the reason for that is that we're 30 years on into this project, and memories are short. And so I think it was an attempt also to just bring the current administration up to speed on exactly what Devens is. And I think there was a sense that Devens is just state property. And so why can't we build housing on state property? Overlooking the fact that there's a piece of special legislation that has been in place for more than 30 years that's governed exactly how things happen at Devens. And then I think that, as Rich said, the real significant point is the second to the last paragraph, which is bolded. You might want to scroll down to that. And it's saying that 282 units of housing is one thing, but if Vicksburg Square is developed and if more housing is developed on land that's zoned for housing, the number of 1,000 housing units is not unreasonable to expect. And with a community with 1,000 housing units, it's not appropriate to live under an interim government. And so it's suggesting in here that a decision be made on permanent government, not necessarily implemented, but at least a decision made before any of those new residents move into Devens, in fairness to the residents who come to Devens. Any comments? Bill?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
I have a couple of comments. One, this is the stance of the town of Harvard, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I don't have a problem with that per se. But, the inference that we need to do jurisdiction before we can address housing, we're 5-6 years away from jurisdiction. So I don't think, especially the Vicksburg Square issue that we've discussed in the past of separating that from jurisdiction, you're trying to put housing back into the jurisdiction package. I don't know whether that'll fly with the Commonwealth.
Well, we'll find out. Janice?
Yep.
Processing. We're saying that don't do housing right now to the state because we don't have a jurisdiction, but yet we're talking about going to super town meeting to fix the Vicksburg Square zoning so that we can create housing. And I think we're just talking all over the place. Not to mention the fact that, 30 years ago, it wasn't necessarily envisioned that there would be residents living on there now, the way the current jurisdiction is. So what I do think is we do need to talk with the state and say, look, you need to make sure that we're all a part of the conversation, because it's not even just who gets the jurisdiction. We've actually, had a couple of months ago, people in the audience concerned about, what's coming. There's got to be a thoughtful process to create a housing, to do their zoning with all of us, because no matter what the jurisdiction ends up being, it will impact every community, whoever lives on there, okay? You got to build a school. Well, while you're building a school, where are you sending kids? So it all works hand in hand. So that, I do think we need to work with the state of you can't just come in, say this, and then walk away while leaving this brief little sentence like, hey, we want to talk to you about working on this. And it's like, well, maybe you should have talked to us a little bit before you did this. So I think that we just got to move a little more thoughtfully and see if we can get the state to understand, stop shooting everybody in the foot.
I think, the initiative that Mike has taken with respect to getting a meeting together,
Yes.
and I think this letter kind of sets the stage for doing just that. And the letter, if you read it carefully, it's not suggesting that we stop doing anything with respect to housing. All it's saying is that we should asking the administration to make a commitment that a decision will be made before new residents move in. That doesn't mean that housing can't be planned, and I think Bill mentioned 5 years before the legislation requires that planning begin. To plan the kind of housing that's envisioned in that legislation and Vicksburg Square, it takes years before that actually materializes. But I think if this kind of helps to answer the question that Mike raised at the last meeting, what is the intention of the state? So this kind of let us know what is your intention. If, for instance, the state says, yes, that seems reasonable to do that, then we know that they're going to essentially stick with Chapter 498, and they're not going to just develop a plan and bring it down on us. So I think you're, hopefully this and the meeting that Mike is putting together will bring a focus to the fact that, this is a complicated proposition, and one of the elements in here is, regardless of when it actually happens, but we need to make a determination on future governance at Devens. Brian?
I would agree. I mean, I think the initiative that Mike is putting together is, hopefully it answers very simple questions, which, are definitely, extremely important. This is asking about, for instance, schools. I guess, what's challenging is we don't have an answer one way or the other at all of is anybody thinking on the state level, about schools. I mean, I don't know exactly what the arrangement is that Harvard has, but my understanding is, you have some agreement, to, have Devens residents have their children go to your schools, and, who's to say that you have the capacity? The Harvard has the capacity if there's an additional X amount of houses, and that's just one aspect of schooling, and there's all sorts of different aspects as far as police and fire and everything else. So yeah, I mean, I'm very hopeful that this initiative at least starts the conversation of getting those questions answered.
Yeah. Robert?
Mr. Chair, I would offer first, thank you to Harvard for doing the letter. I think well written, and I think that the bold paragraph sums it up. Here's what the issue is, I think, as Mike McGovern brought up at the last meeting, which I agree with, is that we're going on a 3-year cone of silence from the state. And in my opinion, it's by design, because you would have to live under a rock to think for 1 minute that whether it's Dan Rivera, the Board of Mass Development, the governor, the state legislature, they'd have to be living under a rock not to know all of the hard work that all of these 3 towns, the stakeholders, the residents that are here, have put in it over the last 3 years and during the pandemic, and we still hear nothing. Nothing. So now we're left to speculate, and that's why I do think that Mike's effort that we talked last time, the first thing is we need, this meeting is critical to get some kind of, having been involved in municipal government, some of you longer than I, but for 20 years, I just can't believe that it's like the broken record again, that there's nothing, and we're left to speculate. So my final part of the remarks is because I'm left to speculate because the state has given us nothing. This is very concerning. As we all know that, unfortunately, what is the great driver sometimes of action, especially with government, is either politics or crisis. And we have a nexus of both right now. The housing crisis, regardless of where you stand on it, is not only real, it is enormous. It is the #1 force pressing down on this governor and other decision makers, hands down. And I just feel now suddenly you have this huge housing crisis, and they're literally looking to put these folks anywhere. I mean, we have them in air and motels. There's a registry of deeds they tried to put them in, airports, you name it. Now, not only Vicksburg Square is now the secondary issue. I feel that they have discovered that there's 82 acres of land on Devens, which is under their jurisdiction, and we are in a crisis. We are in a housing crisis. And it is also a political issue. So now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to read, in which I'm not, read between the lines, that I just feel that they are rapidly moving towards constructing housing on Devens, regardless of what Air, Shirley, Harvard, the deck, the residents on Devens have to say about it, because they haven't responded to us on anything in 3 years. And my final point is, they're looking, and let's make no gripes about it in absence of any other information, they are looking to build affordable housing. This is an affordable housing crisis. So they are not looking to build market rate housing on Devens. The issue is affordable housing as fast as possible, as economically as possible, and as easy as possible. So I am raising the flag of great concern that they're looking at the undevelopable land on Devens first to build affordable housing. They're not going to work. Governance, education, all of that takes too long. The crisis is the housing. Vicksburg Square will be the second issue, because the problem with Vicksburg Square, as Alan and all of us have discussed, Vicksburg Square takes a lot of money and time. We know that the buildings are in horrible condition. So to conclude my remarks, since I've been consistent at every meeting, I just find it unconscionable that our state government is not responding to 3 municipalities, the Devens Enterprise Commission, representatives from the community still, that I think the first step is when we have this meeting, we need to hear directly from them what the plan is, because what I'm reading between the lines is a rapid movement towards affordable housing, and I'm not weighing in a judgment on that, affordable housing to Devens. And we're not interested, governance takes too long. We need immediate housing. We have jurisdiction over Devens. We'll change 498.
And also at the fact we're right in the court of public transportation and rail. They're doing it. They're going to do it.
So I think as soon as we can meet and as soon as we can get answers, and I know we're trying to get with the Secretariat, and I know it's hard, and Mike, I appreciate it. I mean, in an ideal world, it would be the Lieutenant Governor or what have you. And when did you issue this letter?
Last week.
Last week. So it'll probably be weeks, if not months, of crickets.
Correct.
So I thank you for indulging me, Mr. Chair, but
No, that's very
I mean, enough is enough. I mean, everybody around this table, even through a pandemic, we were committed and could meet. We're going on year 3.5 or what have you. And Dan Rivera, and I know we'll get to his wonderful letter momentarily. I mean, come on.
Right.
Just to kind of bounce off what he's saying is, you know, he's right as far as them going to want to just put it up fast and cheap. Cheap being the key word. Okay, so they'll just put up cheap housing, and then later on there'll be some type of repercussion because they created cheap housing. They'll move out of the picture while the rest of us are like, well, why did you leave us with the bag? So therein lies another problem, because you know they're going to walk away. They've probably changed 498 as they did, and then walked away, and then, you know, hearing about a fuss, sitting there going, what are they all complaining about? We don't know what they're saying, because they literally probably don't even know what they wrote.
The thing about Devens right now is they don't have to deal with the municipality. And it really is...
But they're going to come to the municipality to school them, to school anybody, to offer emergency services, everything.
We'll dump that problem in our laps, and we have to figure it out. But the towns can act responsibly. The town of Harvard created a zone at its town meeting last Saturday to accommodate the rapid transit legislation.
BTA communities?
Yes, we've done that. So the towns are capable of responding. And it's very cynical, I think, for the state to look at Devens as someplace that's they don't have to put up with things like town meeting. And they get things done. Now, many of us at this table think that the decision on jurisdiction on permanent government needs to be made sooner rather than later. But those on the committee, like the DEC and Devens residents who think that and others who think that it ought to wait till 2033, the real question is 2033 going to happen? There's nothing in the legislation that sunsets Chapter 498. It could go beyond anyone who thinks it can't go beyond 2033 isn't reading you're smiling, Mike, because you know how these things get written.
I've been saying that for 3.5 years.
So I think that
it's going to be kicked down the road.
The crux of this letter is that if the governor makes a commitment that permanent government will be established before any residents move in, that sets a drop-dead date. Then the Commonwealth can do all the planning it wants, and it's going to be considerable to facilitate more housing because it wasn't planned originally. And it could very well take until 2033 before housing is actually available there.
Well, the other problem
But how do we
is-
know that there's
Right.
going to be a government in place when that happens?
Well-
So this is an opportunity to put a stake in the sand and say, and if the governor makes that commitment and it finds its way into the legislation, then the bottom line is no developer is going to get financing for a housing project without that condition being satisfied. So, Neil.
Mr. Chair, so I agree that a meeting with the legislators and the state is a good move forward, so I hope we can get that. The question about dumping affordable housing at Devens, under the proposed bill language, it opens up the additional 80 acres to development. It doesn't open up all of Devens to development, and it says all of the existing bylaws and rules and regulations remain in place. That means 25% of the housing would need to be affordable, not 100%. We have development rules and regulations in place that foster smart, sustainable, we've got good regulations in place to guide development of that 80 acres should it happen. We still have housing left under the cap, albeit 12 units. It's a minor amount, but there's still the ability of some housing to happen between now and then. So, my concern with this letter is that it says cease all housing on Devens right now until we get.
It doesn't say that.
That's what I'm reading here, but this process needs to be resolved before any new residents take occupancy
Process
at
being
Devens.
determining permanent government.
Yeah.
So before any new residents move in, it doesn't say, the letter's carefully written, it doesn't say that stop all planning.
It doesn't say you can't build new housing. It just says people can't move into it.
Occupancy
Yeah.
permits?
People can't move into it until disposition is decided.
It's intentionally
Yeah.
designed to lock the state into making a decision on permanent government. Now, the local zoning is the purview of every city and town in Massachusetts. The only exception to that is Devens. As we've seen.
But I want to ensure that, that the way the current bill is proposed, the language in that bill, it says the existing bylaws and regulations are still in place. It's not carte blanche. And it does require the creation of a working group with all of us involved, except us.
Just like 498 requires
Right.
super town meeting.
Exactly. So it does have a mechanism in place. The language is there for both lifting of the cap and the rezoning of the Innovation Technology Business District. So I think it's important to look at those items too. But I think the first step is sitting down with the legislators and, getting a meeting with them.
Just out of curiosity, the roughly 80 acres, like, how many units could you get on 80 acres?
That's the magic question.
How tall are you building?
It's going to vary, and that was asked at the last meeting. That's what I was trying to clarify in the minutes too, was that, there's 80 acres. Some of it does have steep slopes. There may be some wetland areas. A rough estimate, people have said 50 acres of that may be developable, but it's all speculative. How many units could you put on 50 acres? Depends on,
What's the density for the MBTA?
15 per acre.
15 per acre.
units.
Yeah.
Our current density for Grant Road is 7 to 8 units per acre. Just to kind of give you an idea of what that kind of looks like, that kind of density. So that's the density that we currently could allow. Spreading that out over the rest of Grant Road that's currently zoned residential and some of the other areas in Devens that are zoned residential.
10 times 50 roughly.
Yeah, I mean, you're not looking at 1,000 units. But
Janice?
Well, I just want to point out, I mean, okay, you get Governor Healy to say, oh yeah, everybody calm down, yeah, everything's fine, we'll do it the way you just recommended, yada, yada. Okay, next election comes up, we got a new governor, and that governor says no.
That,
It happens all the time.
I think what came up at the select board meeting in Harvard was that provision should be written into the current legislation. So that regardless of who the governor is, there will be a law in place requiring a decision on permanent government before anyone takes residence.
Legislation can change. We see it happen all the time. So I think that with us posting the RFEI and us getting the meeting together, I think we're making positive steps. And I think that, anybody wanting to even contact, the government to say, hey, what are you doing? This draws up the attention. The legislation hasn't passed yet. The bill hasn't passed yet, right? When does the bill go forward?
I think they're making a decision by July, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, the scary part is that it actually could change at last minute.
You said it'd be the last one.
So,
Probably June, July, yeah.
yeah. So there's the scary part is that it changes last minute, right there on the floor.
Christian?
Because this is what I do.
Okay.
What is that, just so I understand? What is that?
State government relations.
Yes.
Okay, good to know.
So,
Okay.
Stress one last point, and I'll be very brief,
No.
Mr. Chair. There are the three concerning things. Is one, this ongoing cone of silence. It's unbelievable. I mean, if AIR's going to do something that's going to impact Shirley or Harvard or the deck or vice versa, we all communicate. There's just this constant void of silence, number one. Number two, do not lose sight of the fact at this critical time, there is an unprecedented housing crisis, an enormous political pressure, and now there's this effort underway, and nobody has even picked up the phone or picked up a pencil and talked to this entire group that represents, again, 3 towns, the residents and businesses on there, and the deck, and we've heard nothing. That's by design, in my opinion, absence of anything else. Why wouldn't we hear anything on that? And the final point of this is that I think, and I really hope I'm wrong, but they've shown one of their cards that in over 3 years, to me, there doesn't seem to be any interest on the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to working with this framework group or working on the larger issues of Devens jurisdiction. I mean, there's none. There's no interest. I mean, I haven't seen it, and I think that's also concerning.
Pull a chair up, John.
Thank you. What are you doing over there?
Okay, so to wrap this up, we're waiting some information on a meeting with the secretary and the state senators, and we're waiting for a response to this letter. And by the way, though, it's no accident that this letter is written to the governor and not to Secretary Howe only. It's the governor's legislation, clearly. So hopefully by our next meeting, we'll have some feedback, maybe, from Boston, and we'll see where we stand. Okay, ready to move on? Mm-hmm. Okay, the next item is Mass Development's response to the Vicksburg Square draft warrant article.
hold on, let me just see.
Okay, who would like to start off?
Well, Chair, it's addressed to you, so would you like to start off?
Well, I think, one of the things that, this board made an accommodation to Devens residents primarily and removed the proposed jurisdiction of a future jurisdiction of Vicksburg Square. That was removed from the draft warrant article. The board unanimously approved the balance of it, and one of the key components of it was that the warrant article would require a mix of uses, a mix of residential uses at Vicksburg Square. Basically, half of the units would be owned and half would be rental, as well as a senior housing component. In Dan Rivera's response, he raised some issues that Neil has brought up too, that it's the warrant article actually has to be more technical than the draft that we brought. Valid, those are obviously valid inclusions into a proposed warrant article. But he's suggesting that the mix be eliminated because it would propose it would affect the financial feasibility of the project. And my response to that is that Mass Development has the legislative authority and financial wherewithal to make Vicksburg Square attractive to developers. And if they're proposing not to do that, to Robert's point, what we will get at Vicksburg Square is what we've gotten in the past, and that's a project that is essentially using low-income housing tax credits, which means it has to be 100% rental. And there's no doubt in my mind that because that's the easiest, most financially feasible, given the current situation, type of project that we will get. And, you know, I can give you some examples of what Mass Development may do. Mass Development spent millions of dollars preparing the site for Bristol Myers. Mass Development delivered a completely clean site using Army resources to deliver for the Emerson Green project. There was no environmental issues. There's no doubt in my mind that if Mass Development could either directly clean up Vicksburg Square or hold a developer harmless for any environmental issues there, that would greatly increase the viability of the project. Mass Development is a bank. They can help finance the project. They have authority to abate taxes of any kind, many tools. The tax benefits provided by low-income housing tax credits, Mass Development could match those for the rental using its own resources. So if Mass Development was of a mind to make a mixed-use project work, I believe they could make it work. And what Dan Rivera is suggesting here is they're not willing to do that. So that's my take on it. Neil.
I read it a little differently in the fact that they have offered to come back to the table to talk with us about this. So let's bring them back to the table and discuss all this. Let's see what their thought line is instead of speculating.
Okay. Janice?
Well, my only question at this point, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, so somebody correct me if I'm wrong, do it nicely. On this last paragraph here about the unit mix and affordability and how, you know, we're basically holding a future developer, you know, to the fire. I mean, isn't that what we normally do when a development's coming into town? You know, as far as housing, don't we normally say, okay, what are you doing? How many are going to be rental? How many are going to be this? And wasn't past articles for Vicksburg Square, didn't it include these mixes? So that paragraph confuses me.
I'll just say, Jess, for us, we really have no regulatory authority to say what the actual, whether, you know, it's rental or with developments, you control density, you control, but that make you usually leave it up
But,
because they.
but didn't we previously ask that in a super town meeting article, saying, because I heard some people saying there was too much affordable, not enough affordable?
Well, that's different. You're talking
But no,
affordability. We
but
can,
no,
yes.
I know, but I'm using it as an
But
example.
ownership rental, I'm saying.
But I'm
that's-
using, so, okay, so then I am misunderstanding.
Yeah, no, that, you're
It's a
right.
discussion we
Yeah.
should bring Dan in to have.
No, I agree, so.
Well, I think you're right in terms of a town legislating whether it's rental, but this is a private owner. Massville
Yeah, and that's what
privately
this is.
owns this, and they can choose not to sell the building.
Yes,
So if a
that's
developer
right.
comes along with a rental project, they can choose not to sell it.
That's right.
So it's allowable.
If I may, Mr. Chairman,
John.
I echo Neil's sentiment here that it's good that you have a discussion. I think set up the meeting as soon as you can to start talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
To be clear, it's separate from jurisdiction. This has nothing to do with jurisdiction. This has to do with housing.
Absolutely.
Right? So I think to Neil's point, I think it's a step in the right direction in terms of more housing on Devens.
Right. So in terms of the affordability percentage, 25%, well, doesn't 80% affordable satisfy that requirement?
It does. It's
So-
got to be a minimum.
Minimum,
25%. At least 25% according to the reuse plan.
Right, to your point, Robert.
Mr. Chair, I think the first step is take him up on the last sentence of his letter. If you'd like to meet with me and my team to discuss, I think we reach out and say that this framework committee would like to meet with him at the May meeting. And to Mr. Catter's point, I agree, we keep it just to this issue. But I don't see any reason why Dan Rivera or his staff or these folks can't make a commitment to meet at the May meeting with the framework committee to hammer out and discuss these issues.
Okay. How do we structure our invitation?
Please come, we want to talk to you about your letter in
Right.
more depth and in person where we can all ask questions.
So we specifically request his presence at a meeting. That you're,
Yeah.
Christian?
Yes.
You think that's the way to do it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Catter's point, that we request the framework committee to meet with him, and that it's specifically to this issue. I agree, because there are multiple issues, and so he knows that it's clearly focused is to talk about this.
Yeah, with respect to Vicksburg Square.
Yeah.
Jurisdiction is off the table. That's what we agreed to.
Right.
We'll stick with that.
Right.
Okay.
Can I just say the approach, right, it's the nuance of all this now. If they feel like we're bringing it, we're going to interrogate them. If that's sort of, don't take
No,
that
no.
tone or this adversarial thing, like we're here to,
I can be nice.
You can be, you are, you're a sweet guy. I know this. Right, so just, I'll just make one last comment about affordability. I'll just say this because it's the world that I live in, and my colleague Alicia Hersey and all. Air out here, we are with the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy metropolitan statistical area. 80%, which is moderate income, and when you talk about 80% income, that's not low income, that's moderate. Affordable housing is for low and moderate income. Moderate is 80%. Right now, 80% moderate income, I'll just say this, an individual will be earning right now in air, I think the numbers keep rising rapidly. I think it's now, the annual income is if you're earning $81,000 a year more, you're considered moderate income. Rental right now, a moderate income, 80% for a rental unit, what's considered affordable right now for a one-bedroom apartment is, I think we're approaching $1,700 a month. So just understand, folks, if you know folks that are earning $80,000 themselves or paying almost $1,800 a month for one, that's considered affordable, where we are right now. So don't start stinging these people, these poor, the wretched masses, or whatever it is your thing, your vibe is saying. It's people that work in this building.
Let me ask you this.
People that we are with, this is, and I hate to say it, but that's the place we're at now with housing and what affordability means now.
Mr. Chair, if I may elaborate on that, Alan's point, I think we as a community have to recognize that there's a housing crisis in the Commonwealth. There just is. There's an affordable housing crisis in the Commonwealth. There are police officers, there are teachers, there are nurses. There's a young engineer that I know that cannot afford to live in this town.
Yes.
Right? So
Thank
if
you,
we're
Renee.
talking about affordable housing, we're talking about the individuals that we work with on a daily basis, but they can't live in this community.
Right.
So if we're really talking about short-term, medium-term, affordable housing, Vicksburg Square obviously is important to us all, but we have to address other parcels on Devens. That's the only way we're going to address this in the short and medium term. So, but I agree with you completely.
In the past, Mass Development's pitched how Vicksburg Square and Emerson Green as median housing of Devens businesses.
Right.
Christian, what is the median salary at Commonwealth Fusion?
It's a great question. I'll have to check on that, but I will make a comment and just echo some of the other comments that have been made on the challenges that we have in recruiting to this area, certainly related to the cost of housing. I think there's examples that I hear from our HR team that we extend an offer, they're excited to come, they're out of state, they want to come to Massachusetts, they're excited about working for our company, and then they look at the prices of housing in the area, even in the Devens area, and they decline the offer as a result of housing costs or just a lack of housing in general. They can't find a house here, so it's certainly something that's on our mind.
Yeah.
And I can look into what kind of the median salary is.
Curiosity. I know that the Donahue study that was done quite a few years ago now, the median income of a business at Devens was far higher than $80,000.
Oh, God, yes. Oh, I'm hearing it's about 120.
Have you ever seen any statistics to show how in reality, how low-income housing tax credits attract median income?
They do, like, our 40B we're building out at Fitchburg Road, and they just got their low-income housing all through. They're doing a mix, though, and this is what we need. They're doing some 80s, they're going to do some 50% people that are 50% of them. They're doing some at 30%, and they're going to have some Section 8s. That's what we do in air. Everybody truly is welcome in air, and we want that broad range of those, and that's a true right, 100% affordable 40B with low-income housing.
The
Right.
concept of a range of
Do that
housing
mix. Right.
is precisely why having half of those units as for sale units is important.
That's what it is.
So it's important that you know that home ownership is very important to the strength of the community.
Stability, absolutely.
Okay, so I'll get that letter out. Probably not today, but
Tomorrow?
moving on. Our next item is Harvard's letter to the schools, and that's.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh,
Responses?
okay,
Metrics?
we'll move through this pretty quickly. We got a good response. We just you recall the working group came up with this schedule of issues that need to be addressed by each of the proposed forms of permanent government. And we've been working through that, and the first one was administration, and we had responses from AIR and Harvard, as well as the DEC and Devens residents. Devens residents did an excellent job, John.
That was Marissa Rivera.
Okay, I was going to suggest that. But Marissa is, clearly a student of this sort of thing,
much
kind of planning. But she wrote, the simple question was, if Devens becomes a town, how will it be administered? And if you read through here, this is exactly what we need for our schedule. She says you'll become a town with an open town meeting and a select board and an administrator. And enumerates his or her responsibilities as the administrator. And so this will go to someone who says, well, if Devens becomes a town, what does it look like? And they can key in on this and get a good sense. You'll notice one thing that's not mentioned in here, intentionally, the role for mass development, because they're not on the municipal side. If this is a town, mass development is the redevelopment authority within that town, but it is not the town. It's no longer the interim government gets replaced. Now, the DEC, at the status quo, mass development does retain a role, as does, of course, the DEC and mass development. And if you read through the submission that we got from the DEC, that becomes quite clear. And then from AIR and Harvard, and I'm sure it would be the same for AIR or Shirley, it would just fold into the current administration of those towns. And the only thing that's suggested here, town of Harvard, because it does have a significantly larger responsibility, would have a larger responsibility at Devens, is that it might have an assistant town administrator who is dedicated to Devens and might be posted at Devens, just as an idea. And Marissa, I might add, we asked to keep these responses to 250 words. Marissa's response is 244 words. So, as I said, she's a student of this sort of thing. So, oops, good work, Marissa. Okay, any questions or comments? So this the information is not cast in stone. It goes into the schedule. It's subject to change as we progress, but it's filling the boxes. So the next item, and these are arranged, and the working group did this intentionally to get harder as we progress down the list. The next one is open space and recreation. So we're looking for a response from the towns, from Devens, from the DEC. The interesting thing here that I think each of the stakeholders needs to address is that Devens has become more of a regional asset for providing recreation and open space. So that, I mean, is the town going to take the position that's going to end if we take over? Or is it going to continue? If so, how will it continue? And I'd be very interested to see how Devens as a town would respond to that. So that's the assignment for next time for the stakeholders. Any comments, questions? Is this going to work, Alan?
Of course it's going to work, because we're doing it.
Okay. But I think this is important to progress down this road so that we're able to demonstrate to the state that we are capable of planning for the future of Devens. And I think this is a very organized framework that we're working within. And I think it demonstrates good faith, I think, on our part. Okay, now we get to the educational letter, and this just dovetails into having a meeting with the state and the two secretaries that are involved in this. The letter went to the superintendent of schools in Harvard, went to the superintendent of the Air Regional School District, and went to the Devens Educational Advisory Committee. And I believe as a group, they have requested of Mass Development to be included in this committee that the legislation, the economic development legislation, intends to create, that they have a role to play for precisely the reasons that were discussed earlier, that by adding that much housing at Devens, you can't, right now, if you add 50 units of housing to Devens, the Harvard School District can absorb that. Both the elementary school and the high school have capacity to absorb that. Can they absorb 1,000 units and the prospect of 120 or 150 units within Harvard of new housing that could be developed? So that the letter just basically says we need to start, independent of the legislation, but it says we need to start planning now for the future of education at Devens. In general and specific, what it says is if there's land at Devens that would be appropriate for a school, we have to identify that now, and so that it doesn't get sold off. You know, I think Mass Development's indicated, well, we can find the land. There's plenty of land, we can find the land, but I think Mass Development is many things, but they're not a school district yet, and so they may not know exactly where schools ought to be located.
So when you ask about a school, are you talking about all levels?
I think no, I think it's just suggesting to reserve land for a municipal purpose, which could be a school.
Okay.
It's general, and if it isn't required, doesn't get used, then it can be sold.
Well, I also asked that just because, you know, that would kind of help with, you know, how much land they would need to, you know, possibly earmark. Because would you need an elementary, junior high, high school?
I think that's why the school districts need to be involved.
Yeah.
They're on the front lines.
I'm sorry, I have a FinCom meeting I have to head to.
Okay.
So. All right, thank you.
Thanks for coming. You too?
Sorry about that.
All right, thanks, Brian.
Could I make, just one interesting observation, because it struck me as and I don't know if I should, well, all right. In 1970, 70% of the student body in our air school system were Devens kids. I was really surprised by that when I was doing some research. 70% of in the air school system were Devens kids. So there's a history of us dealing with this. I'm just saying in the past we've.
No, I don't.
in the past.
I actually talked to the superintendent, and they're not afraid to deal with this. So they're not concerned, but they just.
Now, I'm not saying that could be the case, I'm just saying in the past. So it's.
Yeah, they just want to be involved.
No, Mr. Chair, I agree if I may. We had spoken to Dr. Dwight a couple weeks ago, and her comment is very valid. We need to start discussing this. The challenge is, how do you quantify this when you really don't know? I think the first step is talking to Mass Development. What are you looking at? What are we thinking at? And working this collaboratively. But Dr. Dwight's comments were that the enrollment in the Harvard School District is the lowest it's been since 2006. They can absorb up to 300 plus students without much of a challenge. Additionally, they could add on to that school. And additionally, we could also look at parcels on Devens. So there are a few interim steps, I think, that could mitigate some of the immediate concern of more rapid development of some of the housing on Devens. But absolutely, it should be a discussion that involves all parties. And the question of, does additional housing impact school enrollment? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not a planner, but I've seen some studies that show that due to the different dynamic of the family now, fewer kids, matriculation, that correlation, I don't know if Neil, you could talk to it, may not be as dramatic as we are anticipating. So long story short, I think it is an imperative discussion. Couldn't be more pleased with the collaboration that we have with the school district of Harvard. And but I think it's to your point that we need to discuss it.
I would agree with John, and the fact that there's no direct correlation between housing starts and school enrollment. Studies are showing that it is. There are so many variables in play, and just setting aside a chunk of land for a school is not the answer. The answer is is doing the research, addressing all the issues and questions that come up with school enrollment. As John said, family dynamics are changing. People are having less kids. So 400 units of housing doesn't mean you're going to get 400 kids right away. 400 units of housing takes a lot of planning, design, construction, people moving in. That doesn't all happen at once. So these are things that we need to figure out and talk about, and before we say let's just set aside a chunk of land. So I think that's an important discussion to have.
Janice?
I agree, because that's what I said a couple of months ago when we had that call with Senator Cronin. Is that right?
Corbett.
Don't. Oh my God. And Senator Eldridge, and everybody was like, "Oh, can you handle the influx?" And I'm like, "You don't even know what's coming." And to be honest, somebody could buy a house, okay? It has 3 bedrooms, but they got 10 kids. And nobody's paying attention to that part because they're just paying attention to whatever they see coming, which they should, don't get me wrong. And then reactively, but it's like, but you missed this part too. So I agree with the comment, it's hard to plan,
The average household size right now in air is 2.2 people. It's probably less in Harvard.
Yeah.
This is what John's taught. This is just.
That's right, but once our 40B gets built and everything like that, how has that changed? How many units? I mean, everybody acts like, okay, we're building 100 units, 300 kids are arriving. It's like, who, what? Where are you getting these numbers from? Who's creating this stuff? So I do agree that it needs to be tempered, expectations tempered.
And the superintendents are on the front line.
Yes,
so they really
absolutely.
know. I mean, Harvard's most recent 40B produced more children than it was projected.
Right. And that depends on the bedrooms. You do 2 and 3 bedroom unit, right? That's all this. Right.
Okay, moving right along, public comment.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. There we go.
I'll just say that I'm from the Devens Chessie
Come forward.
Jurisdictional Advisory Committee, just reiterating what others have said, that so far, all the messaging that we've gotten, all the feedback we've gotten from Harvard is how valuable the Devens contract is, which you can actually see historically has greatly helped the town of Harvard many a time. And also that, that there is a significant number of kids can be taken up, over 300, 350, and also that in order to get the funding to rebuild the Hildreth School, there had to be plans to expand that school if needed in order to get that funding. So there exists already a plan that could be utilized.
Okay. Other comments? Okay, hearing none. Items for our next meeting. We'll get an update on the REFI. Hopefully we'll get some feedback on the legislation, the meeting that Mike is trying to put together, and perhaps a response from the Harvard letter. Vicksburg Square, will hopefully we'll have, it will be on the agenda if we get an affirmative response from Dan Rivera that he will be here. And then we'll be looking for submissions from stakeholders with respect to how a future government would handle open space and recreation. Any other items? Janice?
If I can make a request of everybody. So the next meeting is scheduled for, it's on the schedule for May 8th. Okay, so as you know, those of you who get the email and everything, I always try to have the packet to you by the Friday before the meeting. If you could have anything that needs to be placed in the packet to me on Friday, that'd be great. I mean, obviously I'm watching, I'll try to update the packet, but I had to update the packet like twice today because I made a boo-boo, okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was your boo.
Yeah, so if, you know, that's just a request. If we could have any attachments on the Friday before so that we can get it uploaded and
Okay.
that would be it.
As
Thank you.
always, we thank the town of Air for letting us use their space and for helping us with our agenda. It's very nice that you're doing that. And Cullen, Christian, Cullen, it's good to see you here.
Thanks. Yeah, nice to be here.
Now, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Without objection, we are adjourned.